Hello and welcome to today's Learn at Lunchtime program from the State Museum of Pennsylvania. I am Beth Erickson. The topic today is Founding a Colony, Building a Nation, William Penn as a Founding Grandfather. And with us is Douglas Miller, Site Administrator for Pennsbury Manor. Douglas Miller has been a museum director for over 35 years, serving at Curtin Village in Center County, Washington's Crossing, Hope Lodge, Graham Park, Brandywine Battlefield Park, and Pennsbury Manor. He currently serves on the board of the Morgan Log House and is chairman of the board of Visit Bucks County. He also serves as a peer reviewer in the American Alliance of Museums accreditation program. Thank you for presenting today's program.
You're very welcome. I'm glad to be here.
So tell us a bit about yourself and what you do at Pennsbury Manor.
So a historic site administrator to the outside world would be the museum director. And one of the things that I love about the work at historic sites is every day is a little bit different. Yesterday, my educator dealt with a site emergency. Prior to that, I worked on a grant as well as helped load hay for our livestock. Pennsbury is a 43-acre historic site. We have living collections as well as the traditional decorative arts that you would expect to furnish a historic site, and our architectural pieces are part of the collections as well. And each day I get to work with a fabulous group of volunteers, and I'm very biased, but I think one of the best staffs around.
Well, it sounds like every day is exciting for you, and that's wonderful.
Absolutely. It's been a labor of love to work at Pennsbury. And William Penn is one of those figures in history that we all know the name and we almost feel guilty that we should know a little bit more. So hopefully this afternoon I'll shed a little bit of light on Fred de Penn.
So let's get to your presentation to learn more. So while you get set up, let me remind the audience that this webinar is being recorded, and by participating in this webinar, you're consenting to the recording, retention, and any use of statements recording as part of this webinar. If you have a comment, place it in the chat and we'll respond to as many as possible. Please submit all of your questions about the presentation in the Q&A, and we'll respond to those after the presentation is complete. So Doug, when you are ready, please begin.
Okay, everyone. William Penn was born into an affluent family. His dad was actually the third highest guy in the Royal Navy, and Penn was not a Quaker at birth. He will make a decision later in life to convert to the Quaker faith. So his father, being highly placed in the Royal Navy, had built up quite a war chest and was able to offer his son probably the best education available in England at that time. He will go to Chigwell Elementary School as a young man, and it's there that he has two life-altering events. He has a bout with smallpox, which should have ended his life, except for the miracle cure of mercury, which did actually kill off the smallpox, but also, like myself, a lot of his hair follicles. And at age 11, he started to develop early pattern baldness. He also ends up having his first vision of God, and he's a very spiritual young man. At age 16, he will enter Christ Church, and basically this is at Oxford. He is studying Greek and the Roman classics while there. Well, that didn't last long. It appears young Penn's favorite word was why, and the faculty there did not appreciate that very much. So within a year of his starting, the admiral, his father, gets a letter from the faculty saying, "Your son is a pain in the behind, and we would very much appreciate it if you took him home." Well, the admiral is scratching his head. What do I do with my son? I want him to have the best. He sends him to Europe to study, and he ends up at a Huguenot academy in Saumur, France. Huguenots are great proponents of religious toleration at this time. They are being oppressed because of their faith in France, and they are basically saying, hey, it's okay to worship as you choose. This, I think, is a seed that it takes root with young Penn. He actually gets to tour Europe and is entertained by the court of Louis XIV. Penn returns home after 2 years of exploring Europe. He is an accomplished linguist, it appears. He has a very unsettling altercation in Paris, where he's actually challenged to a duel, which he participates in. He's been raised in a military family. He's an expert swordsman. He disarms his opponent, but he will later write about how could two men come to near mortal blows over a social slight? And it really sticks with him. Well, after Penn returns home, it's at this time that there is a change in leadership in England. Oliver Cromwell has passed away, and the former or the line of the kings of England is restored. Admiral Penn helps with this, and the younger brother of the king sails off in this Dutch war. Penn is on board his father's ship. In that war, there is a sweeping sea battle. The admiral is victorious, but he places all the accolades with the younger brother of the king, James. James gets to take over the Dutch holdings in the New World. New Amsterdam gets rebranded New York because James is the Duke of York. And New York at that time will extend the whole way down until it bumps into the Calverts of Maryland. Now, young Penn gets to study law at Lincoln's, and it is probably the premier law school. He's also having some life-altering experiences. The first is the plague. The Black Death rolls through London, which is where the admiral has his primary residence, and that is 1665. If we skip forward, you'll see they experienced the Great Fire of London in 1666. London is being consumed by a conflagration that is similar to the fire bombings of Tokyo or Dresden during the Second World War. 2/3 of London will burn in this. There is a precious piece to the family that father and son have to protect. The two of them go into the backyard, dig a great big hole, and bury all the family's wine. We know this because Admiral Penn's next door neighbor was a voracious diarist and reported that of all things that they wanted to save, it was the wine. Well, as a young man, and you'll see a portrait there of young William in armor, he heads off with his father's consent in a volunteer lieutenancy to Ireland, where there's a mutiny going on within the military. There's a battle at a place called Carrickfergus. Our young William will see battle at Carrickfergus. He's written up as being a pretty accomplished swordsman there. While in London or in Ireland, he actually runs into a clothier who talks about this Quaker orator. And William says, my dad and I saw that guy. His name's Thomas Lowe. Where's he at? And the clothier says, he's a couple hours from here. Penn hops on his horse, goes to hear Thomas Lowe preach again. And within the year, he converts to the Quaker faith. Now, at that time, the Quakers were in their first generation, and they were not welcome in England. He will be jailed for his faith, and he will spend time in the Tower of London. Coincidentally, his father, who at a point during the English Civil War is jailed, was in the same jail cell, just not at the same time. Penn speaks up voraciously for the rights of Quakers. He'll write 2,000 letters trying to get Quakers out of jail. He participates in this benchmark case in English law. Basically, he and his co-defendant Meade are basically preaching in a house in London. Quakers were not allowed to have their own meeting spaces, so Quaker meetings were held in people's homes. They are imprisoned for this. They do not show deference to their social superiors by doffing hat, by bowing, and it picks up the nickname of the Hat Trial. The real champions in that trial are the jury. They find Penn and Mead not guilty. They are found in contempt of court, and they will be thrown into prison themselves. Ultimately, the public outcry forces the judge to reverse himself, and Penn and Mead go free. But it sets up in English law and ultimately the American legal system that the will of the jury supersedes the will of the judge. Penn's father is knighted. He is the third highest guy in the Royal Navy. Giles Penn, Penn's grandfather, is a seafaring captain. He's a merchant. He's going back and forth to North Africa, and he actually helps negotiate the safe release of 200 prisoners of Barbary pirates who were English citizens. For that, he gets a diplomatic posting to Morocco. His firstborn son will be the Admiral, William Penn Sr., who he will buy a captaincy, but the Admiral basically takes off and becomes a war hero in England. His firstborn son is named William, and William Jr., as we mentioned before, gets this grand tour of Europe. Some of the major players in William Penn's life and the Admiral's life would be Oliver Cromwell, who leads the successful Civil War and will lead England for about a decade. He names himself Lord Protector rather than the disposed of king taking that role. When he passes, that's when Admiral Penn and 10 other English citizens are asked to go to France, to Brittany, to plead the case to the two sons of the disposed and beheaded king that, hey, if you come back to England, we will reinsert you on the throne and we promise that you won't get your heads cut off. While Penn, young Penn, was in France, he was entertained by the court of Louis. The younger brother of the king is the Duke of York, who you'll see here. The family coat of arms is here. The small photo on the right-hand side of the screen is Admiral Penn's battle armor, and it is in a church. Underneath that is the Penn's coat of arms. Now, for young William, there was a hugely influential figure who is George Fox. George Fox is the founder of the Quaker faith. He will strike out at age 19. He's been raised in a good Puritan family. He's been afforded a good education, but his parents allowed him to explore his own spirituality. So he's traveling across England at this time, attending different church services, Church of England, Catholic, Protestant. Some he's welcomed in, some he's shunned in, but along the way, he kind of feels that, you know, God can speak to him directly. He experiences the inner light, which is a core precept of a faith that he will found, the Quaker faith. It's really called the Society of Friends. Within the Quaker faith, everyone has the inner light, and God can speak to everyone directly. Emerging Quakers feel that everyone else's Holy Spirit and individual souls are at risk if they don't find the inner light themselves. When they interrupt ongoing services, so seized by the faith that they're shaking, people call these members of the Friends Quakers in a derogatory name, and the Quaker faith has embraced that and turned it around. Penn courts and marries a beautiful fellow Quaker, has a loving relationship with Gulielma. There are many things we don't know about Guli, but we do know from his correspondence and so on that he was very much in love with her and had 8 children with Guli, 4 of which died in infancy. As a young firebrand Quaker, he will start to write anti-Catholic and Anglican doctrine pieces. He will be thrown in the Tower of London yet again. You'll see the quote there, "My prison shall be my grave before I will budge a jot, for I owe my conscience to no mortal man." He writes the anti-Catholic "No Cross, No Crown," and he and the Foxes, because George Fox will marry Margaret Fell, and they are seen in England as co-founders of the faith, the Penns actually attend their wedding and vice versa. There was a very close relationship there. Now, Penn has inherited quite a war chest from his father. His father disowns him when he takes on the Quaker faith, canes him, throws him out of the house. They reconcile, they come together. But the admiral finally passes, and there is a debt owed to the admiral from the crown for services provided earlier in the admiral's life. The admiral is fighting for England on foreign shores. He has about 2,000 men under his command, and Parliament cuts off military spending. Or, as I like to put it, the executive branch is not playing nicely with the legislative branch. The admiral takes his personal money to keep the campaign going and pays for the commissary or the feeding of these troops and their wages. The sum is 11,000 pounds sterling, which is a tremendous amount of money at that time. With his death and the death of the king previously, who had incurred that debt, it doesn't look good for anyone. But with the restoration of Charles II and young William inheriting his father's wealth, he has an opportunity with that debt. Prior to his stab at creating his own colony, he invests in a colony right next door to Pennsylvania. It's West Jersey. West Jersey is divided east and west, as you'll see in the map. West Jersey is a Quaker enclave. Two of the proprietaries are not getting along. They turn to a fellow Quaker in London named William Penn, who has studied law at Lincoln, to help them discuss their differences. William Penn finds that a proprietary interest is available in West Jersey, and he buys in using some of Dad's money. He will actually write some of the founding legislation for what will become New Jersey. Well, about that time, Penn and Fox actually go to profess the faith through the Germanic-speaking areas, Holland, Germany, Switzerland, and as almost a tag team, they are going and professing the Quaker faith in these European areas and trying to build converts to Quakerism. Now, Penn's finances were fairly strong in what he inherited from his father. He inherited a number of properties. The admiral was awarded an estate in Ireland. Castle Macroom still is extant in Ireland. We're not quite sure how much of a dowry he might have gotten in the marriage to Gulielma. However, he was equally good at spending the money. He was a fop. He liked nice clothing. He lived sometimes outside of his ability. But he had this idea that was in part spiritual, but very much an entrepreneurial idea that after 6 years of experimenting with the West Jersey thing, the Quaker leadership still could not come to consensus on everything. And Penn gets this idea, I think I could do better on my own. So he approaches Charles II with this debt that is owed to his father, which with interest has now grown from the 11,000 pounds to 16,000 pounds. And in March of 1681, they have basically come to a deal for lands west of the Delaware. However, there's a third party involved in these negotiations. It's James, the younger brother of the king, who was the head of the Royal Navy, who had sailed with Admiral Penn. Remember, Admiral Penn let him take the accolades for the victory, and New York, named for James, the Duke of York, went the whole way down till it bumped into the people of Maryland. So really what was Pennsylvania, or will become Pennsylvania, belonged to James. James says, I'm probably never going to go there, but I like the idea of this Newcastle place, so give me a 12-mile circumference around Newcastle. Have any of you ever looked at the map of Pennsylvania and seen that semicircular part down in the southeastern quarter? It goes to this negotiation. Charles asked William Penn, what will you call your colony? And Penn stands and proudly says, New Wales. The king has an advisor from Wales who absolutely hated the Penn family. And he tells Charles II, don't do it. It's a bad idea. Charles goes back to Penn. He says, I'm not hot on the Wales idea. Can you give me an alternative? And Penn says, Sylvania or Woodlands. Charles says, I like it, but my family, the crown, our country, England, owes a debt to your father that we can never fully repay. So we will name it Pennsylvania in his honor. How many of you thought Pennsylvania was named for the Quaker guy? The irony of the holy experiment is it's based on a military debt and it's named for a war hero. The next day, after receiving the charter on March 4th, 1681, Penn writes a letter to one of his best friends, Robert Turner. In that letter, he says, everyone's going to think it's a vanity on my part. And I will argue that most people think that Pennsylvania is named for the Quaker guy, not the English war hero. So prophetically, I think Penn was right in that. What we would know as America or the United States at this point, you've got East and West Jersey, you've got Pennsylvania. Penn is actually granted oversights of the lower counties, which we would know as Delaware. Maryland, of course, is established. Virginia is established. Penn's vision was a holy experiment, but it was an entrepreneurial one. He was not giving the land away. His niche market were the religiously disassociated. Remember when he had traveled in Europe? He recognized, both studying there and traveling there, that there were many different religions, all Christian-based, worshiping as they chose, but many of them were being oppressed because of that. So he was marketing Pennsylvania as a place to come and worship as you would choose. My ancestors were Swiss Mennonites, and in 17th century terms, we probably would have been high on the whack job scale. Penn courted Mennonites among many to come here and establish a new life. So you've got a brand new colony. How are you going to rule it? Think about the daunting task that was on Penn's plate at that point. He will sit down and he will write out the Great Law, which is actually 82 individual laws for how things should work in his new colony of Pennsylvania. This is a map of part of eastern Pennsylvania. Penn will establish his home in the new colony just below modern-day Trenton, where the river turns. He will call it Pennsbury Manor. It is probably in the neighborhood of 6,000 acres at that time. His cousin was his advance man. He was a seafaring captain and will become his lieutenant governor. Penn writes letters of introduction to 6 different European groups in their own languages who are living in the drainage that will now be Pennsylvania. One of the letters is in English, but it's written to the King of the Canadas. It's a letter of introduction to the Lenape people. And it's a beautiful letter of mutual coexistence. There's actually a European living where Pennsbury was. His last name is King. Captain Markham arranges to buy him out, much to King's displeasure. When Mr. King leaves, he actually locks the barn and takes the key with him. So Penn is actively soliciting settlers to come. He is not giving the land away, but he's selling it at what he considers a fair price. This land he is purchasing from the Native Americans. The land where Pennsbury is, basically 15 miles of river frontage, he buys from the Lenape in what the account ledgers show is 2,100 pounds of trade goods, or essentially 1/8 of the purchase price of the entire colony. He will then in turn have that land surveyed and start to sell it at a markup to these incoming settlers. A core premise of his colony is freedom of conscience. We can think of that as religious diversity. pretty much as long as you're worshiping God, he was okay with you. He wouldn't have believed that atheists would be welcomed. He recognized that Native peoples were worshiping the Great Spirit, and he saw the Great Spirit as the same God that Christians were engaging with. Intolerance would be unlawful. An assembly would be elected by the people to accept the laws. Trials would be by jury. Offenses with Native people, the jury would be 6 Native people and 6 Englishmen. There was a penal system, but it was set up with the idea to reform people, not just punish them. There'll be laws and suffrage, and he works hard to establish a good relationship with the Lenape people, who are the Native peoples who have been in eastern Pennsylvania, New Jersey, southern New York State, touching into maybe Massachusetts and Connecticut, down into Delaware, and a corner of Maryland. Those people were here for at least 15,000 years. His surveyor general is Thomas Holmes. He does the surveys for the land sales, and he advertises, hey, come to Pennsylvania, come to America. We look into primary source material or original documents to find out about these early settlers. We use the province of Pennsylvania, some accounts from there. These are actually not just published letters, but they're marketing pieces. It portrays Pennsylvania almost as a land of milk and honey. And for people who couldn't own land, middle-class people in England, it gives them an opportunity to be property owners. For £100, you could buy 5,000 acres. Those that did this were considered first purchasers. Penn's future father-in-law, Thomas Callaghill, is one of the first purchasers, as in Callaghill Street in Philadelphia. In 1681 to 1684, he offers bonus lots at Philadelphia to encourage the settlement of what he would envision as his green country town. His home, Pennsbury, is actually 26 nautical miles up the Delaware from where Philadelphia will be established. And he establishes a process where indentured people, people who have sold themselves into servitude for a set amount of time, depending on your skill set, your indenture may be shorter or longer. But after finishing your indenture, he was giving them 50 acres of land inland. It was a brilliant way to move a skilled workforce inland and start to settle his colony. There had been many wars between English colonists and Native peoples leading up to Penn's establishment of Pennsylvania. There was an Anglo war against the Powhatans down in the Jamestown area. There was a fur trade war in central Pennsylvania based around the fur trade, but between Susquehannock people and Iroquois people, fueled out of Dutch and English interests out of the north and Calvert interests out of the south. And the biggest one would have been King Philip's War up in the Massachusetts colony. At the end of King Philip's War, estimates go as high as 1/3 of the colonial population dying during that war and 50% of the native population. Wars are expensive. They're a drain on the crown. Penn, of course, is a Quaker and will not follow a path of violence any longer. So he was the right guy, but the Lenape were the right cultural group, and they welcomed Penn and worked with him. Penn employed interpreters such as Lasse Cook. He is a Swede who predated Penn being here when it was a Swedish colony. He's a landholder. He knew the Lenape language. Penn will learn a almost trade dialect or pidgin dialect that allows him to move around cultural groups. The core element is the Algonquin language. So kind of think of it as people who speak High German can also be understood by the Dutch. They can be understood by the Swiss. They can be understood in Austria as well as Germany. So Penn would learn enough to have casual conversations, polite conversations, but when it came to the deep conversations, he was employing these interpreters. And he always stocked his home with trade goods. Pennsbury in one inventory had 60 firearms, which raised my eyebrows when I first saw a Quaker with 60 guns. But when one reads the trade agreements or the land purchases, it was with trade goods. And for hunters, as well as warriors, firearms were a necessity. Penn would treat with the native peoples. The center portrait is very famous. It is Penn treating with the Indians, done by Benjamin West. This is done decades after Penn is dead, and it's very much a marketing piece by the later generations of Penn, trying to restore their reputation because of the damage done by the infamous walking purchase. The walking purchase will be when Penn's sons essentially cheat the Lenape out of a core section of their homeland. This will displace them in what Lenape people, or today the Delaware, call the forced removals. And they are by force moved off of their homeland after being cheated out of it. They will face 8 forced removals. Ultimately, 2 branches of them, the Delaware tribe and the Delaware Nation, have landed in what is formerly Indian country, Oklahoma. Freedom of conscience. This is a key precept that we all enjoy as American citizens and is not always enjoyed in other countries. Maryland was already doing this, yes. They had religious toleration up till 1666 when they rescinded it. Penn allowed Jewish immigration here, and one of the earliest synagogues was in his Philadelphia. He had actually spoken out against Catholicism as a young firebrand. After Charles II passes, the younger brother James ascends the throne. Penn will be a courtier to James, but James's daughter has married a staunch Puritan who begins to raise armies, William, against the father. James's father had been beheaded at the end of a civil war. James decides to advocate, return to Brittany, which we would think of as France, but it's part of England at that point, and go into retirement. And the William and Mary period comes in. Penn is accused of treason. His first frame of government is 1682. He had great advisors that he borrowed from who were contemporaries. Algernon Sidney was somebody that was a mentor for him. John Locke is somebody that he had had discussions with and so on, and both influenced his thinking about government. I'll go to the center. Let the men be good and the government cannot be bad. We hope for that in all forms of government. A comment about Penn's frame of government. At the point of the founding of the United States, we had the Articles of Confederation. Penn's frame of government worked as well as the Articles of Confederation, and he would be forced to revisit it as we had to as a fledgling country when we had a constitutional convention to bring us the Constitution. So with his laws, men over 21 owning 50 acres of land could vote. Similar laws to those that were in the Commonwealth period of England at that time. Quickly, a boundary dispute develops with his southern neighbor. Penn's advance man goes down and meets with the Lord Baltimore. The Lord Baltimore is the hereditary title for the Calvert family. Maryland was a family-owned colony, just like Pennsylvania was at that time. To say that the Lord Baltimore did not like Penn's emissary would be underselling the difficulties. Penn arrives and goes down, proudly tells the Lord Baltimore that the southern boundary of Pennsylvania pretty much runs through modern-day Baltimore. Lord Baltimore chose to heartily disagree. I tease people that if William Penn had spontaneously combusted. I don't think the Lord Baltimore would have spit on him. The truth is, the Calvert claim went to the 40th parallel and dates to 1634. The 40th parallel is about where the PA Turnpike is today. Those families will disagree for 3 generations until the king at that time, the mid 1700s, will be so fed up with him that he sends correspondence to both families saying, I just hired 2 surveyors. One's named Mason and one's named Dixon. I'm sending them from England. They're going to shoot a line and you people are going to shut up and deal with it. Thus, we get our current boundary between the Pennsylvania colony and the Maryland colony. Penn will have to return to England in 1684 because of this boundary dispute. The Lord Baltimore has rushed back to plead his case directly to the king. And if you're going to be a successful colonial governor, you got to suck up to the king. Penn returns. He will go through extensive life changes. After James advocates, he's suspected of treason. It is a capital offense. He is jailed. He pleads his own case and is found not guilty, but spends a couple years under house arrest. And that time is very sketchy for historians. We don't know much about that time. He will lose his beloved Gully in 1684. He will lose his firstborn son from their marriage, Springett, who he was grooming to be his successor, and he's at a very low point. However, by 1685, late in 1685, he's pulled himself together and he begins to court Hannah Callahill, the daughter of that first purchaser, Thomas. She is half his age. She's 26. He's in his early 50s. She blows him off at first, and a third party gets involved. Penn's daughter from his first marriage starts to write to Hannah, hey, take a second look at dad. He's pretty okay. Between the two of them, they wear Hannah down, and she marries William in 1696. I think of them as a power couple. She is brilliant. She is everything that he is lacking. She has a tremendous business sense, financial sense. He's a big picture guy, and the devil's in the details. They will have 8 children together. 1699, they're on their way to Pennsylvania. There's unrest over Penn's frame of government, and he needs to straighten it out. He needs to be here personally. Hannah, who is extremely pregnant for the sea voyage, comes with him, as does Letitia, the daughter. In the slate roof in Philadelphia that he rents for the family is where John the American is born in 1699. Towards the end of his life, he has many disappointments. He is able to straighten out the unrest of the governing of Pennsylvania by writing what's called the Charter of Privileges, which is the next frame of government that he will have. He has to rush back to England in 1701 because his creditor is calling in a chit. And what was up for mortgage was the colony. Penn basically will have a son from the first marriage disgraced. That is William Penn III, nicknamed Billy. The creditor will die, Philip Ford. Without it being settled, Penn will be imprisoned in a debtor's prison until he is bought out by wealthy Quakers. In 1712, he will have a stroke that leaves him unable to rule the colony. But Hannah will step forward. She is never credited as being the first female governor of Pennsylvania, but she serves in that capacity in an excellent way. And we will lose friend Penn after 5 strokes leading up to that point in 1618. He's interred in Jordan's, England, at a Quaker meeting house. So what about his contributions to liberty in both the Old World and the New World? He was a champion of religious toleration, or today we would say religious freedom. He used his diplomatic skills in the court of James, as well as to work for the freedom of Quakers. He saved many of them from potential hanging. He wrote a lot in Quaker theology and in literature. There's just a brief synopsis of many of the books that he wrote. It's interesting there's a quote from him that he has have few books and select them well, yet he was a prolific writer and wrote a lot of them himself. To Philadelphia, that grid system that we know, the parks, the green belt, having lived through the fire of London, he wanted to be his green country town. He wanted to protect from disease, from plague, from fire, and he wanted a great port, which Philadelphia still is today. And quite frankly, the ease of getting into the port is one of the many reasons that we had such great immigration as an early colony. To the population, you'll see he invited many people for his holy experiment and allowed them to worship as they chose. He had great relations with the Lenape. He recognized their rights. He recognized their religion, their matrimonial system, and he kept the agreements that he made. He wanted to propagate peaceful trade because he saw that as good business practice. Today in our Constitution, we have rights of jury and trial by jury. We have a penal system that tries to reform people, not just punish them. Capital offenses tend to be just murder and treason today, as was laid out by Penn. The common man has the right to vote. Now, I know I covered a lot of ground. I would welcome your questions at this point.
And we do have some of them. Doug, thank you so much for the presentation. So let's get to a few questions. This one just came in, but I think it's a good follow-up for the presentation. So what would you say was the internal driving force behind Penn? Was it his faith? Was it his entrepreneurial instinct? Was it something else?
I will lean heavily into the Quaker faith. And there are instances where he falters as a young man. I had mentioned where Quakers are not allowed to have meeting houses until 1688. A group of them are meeting in somebody's home in England, and the military is sent in to break it up. Young Penn, again, trained as a soldier, steps up, beats the stuffing out of one of these guys and throws him down the stairs. And everyone else is like, oh my gosh. That's the last time we think Penn raised his hand to somebody. He, a good example, it is 1700. The yearly meeting of Friends is being held on this side of the Atlantic in Philadelphia. And it is noted in the meeting minutes that the governor is attending. And he has proposed a meeting for Blacks, for enslaved people, and encouraged good Quakers to take Native peoples into meeting with them. So in many ways, his faith is guiding many of his decisions. And I would say strongly, I would also say he was not a good entrepreneur. he hemorrhaged money.
So go ahead. Yes. In a book of Pennsylvania history by J. Simpson Africa, he asserts that Pennsylvania is so named because Penn is an old word for a hill or knoll, so wooded hills. Do you know if there's any truth to that?
Not to my knowledge. I mean, the king is the one who allows the naming, and we have a clear documentary record saying it is named for the admiral. So the naming of Pennsylvania, the Sylvania, of course, comes from the Latin of woodland. It was clearly designed to honor the admiral and the admiral's service to England.
You mentioned Oliver Cromwell in your presentation. Did he ever settle in the land that would become the United States, or did he remain in England?
He remained in England, and his leading the Civil War, essentially the king at that time, Charles I, was facing off against Cromwell, and his armies were called the Roundheads for the helmets that they would wear. They were Puritans. They wanted stronger Puritan values throughout England, and they wanted a strong parliament. After losing the Civil War, Charles I will be beheaded, and there will be a very strong parliament that develops, but it is also an austere time religiously. Puritan values are pressed hard upon the populace. Cromwell, when he dies, the populace actually was aghast that you would behead a king, and they kind of like the idea of having a royal family, but they also like having a strong parliament. So when Charles II comes in, it very much allows a new England to start to develop with a strong parliament, but also a monarchy who's ruling. Cromwell did some incredible things for England. The strengthening of the parliament is probably the most critical. He will oppress Catholicism throughout Ireland and English holdings. And there are many things that were not very popular, not very good, that happened during his time. So some mourned him, others did not.
Do you think that William Penn's son, who took on his mantle, made everything go downhill for the Penn family?
I believe the apple fell far from the tree. I think it was a very complex time. Now, remember, we mentioned that Hannah kind of ran things, and the sons who inherit Pennsylvania, Billy from the first marriage, the surviving son, by Penn's second will, he's remarried. He has sons from the first or the second marriage, gives Billy the estates in Ireland that had been Admiral Penn's, and Pennsylvania is to go to his sons and his widow. Pennsylvania is not going well at that time. And prior to his stroke, Penn has been negotiating to sell it back to Queen Anne, sell it to the crown. And Anne, her response is, I already got a royal colony. In desperation, he has dropped the purchase price to the 11,000 pounds, which was what his dad laid out in the war. Anne accepts, but the documents are never drawn up. Billy contests it. It's an ugly fight in the family, and ultimately Queen Anne backs out, leaving Hannah and the three sons, who were still too young to rule the colony, to hold the bag. They do some good while they are here. With relation to the native peoples, they break that relationship. And it's heartbreaking because Pennsylvania had a number of native communities, tribes that were here who no longer are. There may be individual tribal members who live within the boundaries of Pennsylvania. I know a Delaware Nation member who lives right up the river from Pennsbury, but they don't have official status within their homeland.
Are there any remaining Penn family descendants living in Pennsylvania?
There are no William Penn descendants within Pennsylvania that we are aware of. The lineage is traced through the father's line, and the last male heir or descendant of William Penn passes away after the American Civil War. We think the guy was going a little bit crazy. All of William Penn's correspondence had stayed together to that point, and this man actually sells all of it to two rag dealers in London. One recognizes that this correspondence at that point is 200 years old and parts it out to collectors and private institutions. We think the other half is pulped and destroyed. So there are a lot of holes in the Penn story that we don't have.
Thank you to everyone for your questions. Doug, what would you like the audience to remember from today's presentation?
I think we had a conversation with my staff, and shout out to Zach, my educator, who put together the PowerPoint, because Doug is technology challenged. And we wanted to look at the contributions of Penn. Why is he important? Why should we care? If you think about the rights that we have today, the right of the common man to vote, the freedom of religion that we enjoy, the rights of jury and trial by jury. I think that is why we should remember Penn. And really, how he treated people can still be a guidepost for all of us today. He could sit in a longhouse, eat off of a bark plate with equal comfort as sitting at the court of Louis or at James's table as a courtier. And I think that that is a gift that he had, but something that we might all try to emulate.
Thank you so much for this presentation today. I learned so much and really appreciate all the information.
Thank you all for being here. I love to talk about the guy.
All right. Well, we're going to ask the audience if you would please join us for more Learn at Lunchtime programs. Visit the State Museum of Pennsylvania's website at statemuseumpa.org for more information and to sign up.